Today is Tamil New Year's Day, and a very warm greeting to all our viewers who are coming to us from Tamil Nadu. Okay, so let me get back to the show. And where do we begin? Today, we have to do it with an apology because we're 15 minutes late. We had some technical issues that we had to resolve, but our guest has been exceptionally cool and calm. She's helped us resolve the issue. And I think where I wanted to start was to say we've all seen the potter's wheel and how potters start by shaping what is just clay into beautiful works of art. Trainers and facilitators have to do it for a whole group of people. They have to read the room. They have to figure out when they walk in what is the kind of atmosphere within the room and then figure out how they're going to impact it, influence it, shape it, and mold it. Today, we have a veteran. Aparna Chandrashekar has seen the world from several angles, and she's met people who are just getting into their first job, and she's trained people who've been extremely experienced. So her career journey has been fascinating in several ways, and let's bring her on board and let you hear it in her own words. Hi,
Hello.
Aparna.
A warm
Great to
greeting
have
to
you
everybody.
on the show.
Thank you. Thank you.
And I'm sure that as a trainer, as a facilitator, and as the number of programs that you've conducted, you've obviously had ways of starting a session which, sort of get you into the stride, get you into the stream. So we'll start there and then we'll go back to where things were.
Okay, so this doesn't sound so great coming after our apology for being late, Renu, because I think the facilitator's trick is to actually arrive way early, have actually arrived at offices before anybody but the security people were around even. So as
Right.
people walk in, I think you already have, sometimes they let you into the room so you know what the
Right.
room is like. But greeting each one as they come in has been my, I think, not so much strategy, it is my need to be there early. But that's helped because by the time we start the session, there are 5 or 6 familiar faces already. And
Okay.
when you say, hi, I'm from here, and they're already nodding, and then I say, like Pradeep said here, and you can already see
Okay.
the smiles.
Okay.
So my
Okay.
go-to line there when I bring in names is Sholay. In there is a dialogue where Amitabh Bachchan asks Hema Malini, says, "Tumhara naam kya hai, Basanti?" Because she starts every sentence with Basanti does this, Basanti does that. So by the time the program begins, I know Pradeep, Leena, Rajesh, at least 5 of them at least. So I think
Okay.
that's been my
No,
trick.
that's a wonderful way of establishing. So they don't see you; they see you one on one, and get a chance to interact with you right at the point when they come in. So you're putting
Correct.
them at ease, and I think this is one of those wonderful insights which seem simple on the face of it, but it's not so simple until you actually see the effect that it has on the sessions that you conduct. But let's go back to how your career started and evolved to where it is today. So you grew up in Baroda.
Bombay and Baroda. And I think
Okay.
I shocked. So we lived very close to the other railway station in
Okay.
Bombay in my very, very early years. So I think I
Okay.
shocked my parents by saying I wanted to become an engine driver. I don't know whether they really took me seriously, but I could see the look of horror on their faces. And I was
Okay.
nonchalant about it, okay? Because I saw this big thing, powerful, and I saw the driver as this person who had power and capacity to take people
Okay.
to their destination. It was just fascinating. I said, he must be a very, very powerful person. I think
Right.
as I grew up, I had, I mean, this would change every day. So it would be a doctor when I saw a doctor in action, an actor when I saw someone, a trapeze artist. It just went through the whole gamut until I had a fabulous English teacher. And then she was such a kind person. In addition to doing her work, I think she was just this elderly, kind person. and I suddenly wanted to speak like her, look like her, be an English teacher. I think my parents breathed a big sigh of relief because that was like a kosher profession to have. So that's what it was. And while I had the marks to go into medicine and engineering, I actually
Yeah.
happily went into literature. So my parents had to come and tell my teachers that I was doing this out of choice.
Okay.
So that was good fun.
Okay. And so as you moved on and then you graduated, what are the kind of things that were then going through your mind as to what needed to be, what where you would go next?
So completely aimless, had no idea about a career in mind. I knew I wanted to teach English. I didn't even know who I wanted to teach English to, whether it was very
Okay.
young kids, whether it was older adults. I didn't know what it was. So I finished my graduation, I got married, came to Bangalore, studied here. And then I knew that I wanted to be a college, teacher. So I wanted to
Okay.
go on and do a PhD. I actually did very well and got a gold medalist both at undergraduate and postgraduate level. So everybody kind of expected to say, okay, and she's going to go on to do her PhD, but I didn't. I stopped, and there was a stopgap arrangement. Somebody had gone on maternity leave. My MA results were not out. They said, look, we are desperate for an English teacher. Can you please fill in for her? And that's
Okay.
where I went into teaching engineering students, diploma in engineering. And I had to teach them English. I was 3 years, maybe 4 years older than the students. I tried to wear a bindi, wear heels, look taller, bigger, all of those. And that's where there was a very amusing story that I was telling Deepa, that I was driving my car and she made a post of it. This was a diploma engineering student who, in a very busy intersection, waved my car and stopped it. The person was a cop. And those days, they used to stand on a pedestal kind of a thing. So he got
Okay.
off the pedestal, and I was wondering, and what I had done wrong. I had no
What you had
idea.
done wrong?
Yeah. But anyway, I stopped out of respect because he flagged me down. He came in and said, don't you know me? And I was really upset because I didn't know who he was. I said, I'm so sorry. He said, oh, don't be sorry, madam. You taught me English.
Okay.
I just heaved a huge sigh of relief. And as I was driving from there, he just stopped the rest of the traffic. All eyes were on me, literally, when he waved this little Maruti car, saying, you carry on. So I'll never
Uh,
forget that, because sometimes you wonder the rewards of being a teacher don't really come, in the expected places. They come in the most
yes.
unexpected of places. Yeah. So that was what it
Teachers, I've
was.
realized, are among the most influential people that you didn't know because they
I think much
ultimately
later.
they tend to have, especially when they're teaching little classes, their parents are in positions of power, and the teacher is always seen as somebody who makes a big difference to the lives of people.
True.
Okay, so you taught there for how long? What happened next? How did things
So
move on from there?
very funny story. I mean, I literally did two jobs in Bangalore on Palace Road. There are two colleges opposite each other. There's
Okay,
Maharani's College and there's Home Science College. So I actually taught all substitutes because jobs were not easy to come by. And I had
okay,
just got my results. I was not from here. I didn't speak a word of Kannada. Okay, so all
okay,
these were, a lot of things loaded against me. And somehow I just managed. I did two classes here, crossed the road, went over to the other side and did two other classes. And all for a royal sum of, I think, 400 rupees in each college. This was
yeah,
1986. But the
okay,
beautiful part was when you took a bus and came there in Majestic, there were these old booksellers, and they sat
Hmm.
there and they sold used books. I lived
Right,
like a princess because I think I picked up the whole collection of Somerset Maugham and everything for some 25 rupees or 50 rupees or something that few hundred
okay,
rupees still afforded it. Okay, so it was
okay,
amazing. So no complaints there, and it was great fun. Just across the road, the quality of the students and everything was so different. I had to switch gears literally when I went from one place to the other. Then I found a job and went to Jyoti Nivas College.
okay.
And this was a girls' college. And
Hmm.
strangely, they had their gates locked. So only women were
Okay,
allowed inside. I became very
okay,
popular with my husband's friends who all wanted to pick me up. So you can imagine why. So that was good fun because this college had everything from PUC to graduation to post graduation. And I went in with stars in my eyes. The big thing was I said, I have to make a difference. Oh, initially,
Right.
you do all the donkey's work. You really don't make a difference or don't get to make a
Right.
difference yet. So I was literally
Right.
doing what everybody else did not want, which was grammar and all of the stuff that, one has to do. It's like a visit to the
Hmm.
dentist, right? So that's
Right.
what I got. So I enjoyed myself. I was just very happy being with students. And then they introduced a post-graduation course. And this was fantastic because, they had people like works of people like Girish Karnad, Shashi Deshpande. You didn't find anything on them. So I suddenly was on my own. And again, nobody wanted these because there was no literary work on them. I was quite happy to do that. So I think I took
Okay.
up that challenge, but it was like just like an easy flow. College was like an easy flow. Had fantastic students, did some fantastic stuff there. Got to meet a lot of people who came in as guests. I was like a permanent one of the MCs in college. So my high point there was meeting Rakesh Sharma, the
Okay.
astronaut. Okay,
The
and
astronaut. Yeah.
movie stars and whoever else they called as
Yeah.
chief
Right.
guests, because as
Right.
an MC you get to really hobnob with them and have
Right.
tea with them. So
Right.
which was those were all the perks of being, I think, a teacher then. Very strangely, after 12 years of teaching, and I wasn't even bored, I was very happy. And suddenly somebody brought this advertisement to me and said, doesn't it look like it's been written for you? They wanted somebody with a linguistics literature background who was a language specialist. And what did they want the person to do? To take away people's mother tongues and help them understand the American accent. And I had studied all of these theoretically. I had no personal experience except for all the movies that I'd watched. So went in for for an interview for a lark. So this was at a very glamorous place called ITPL, and in those days it was like far
Hmm.
away, Whitefield,
Hmm.
and it was like one of the modern tech parks. Those days they were just coming up. So it had
Right.
marbled corridors, multiple elevators, and cafeterias, and it looked like a
Right.
little bit of mall, fountains, the works. So I went for the fun of it, and I sailed to the interview. And the next thing I knew was, the HR person was asking me, "Would you like to join us? What kind of a salary are you expecting?" And that's when I realized that I hadn't even thought about it.
Okay.
So anything was better than college anyway. So so I went in there and I went in as a training manager. And when we talk about first job, I don't know, in the real world, I would say that was my first job. I would say college was a breeze. I was a little more than a student, just meandering along nicely. And suddenly, there was this whole new world where you had targets. I had not heard the word appraisal, performance appraisal.
Okay.
So I had not even heard it until I came into first string, which was the first job that I had. And when they said that, I said, I'm sorry, what's that? And they looked at me very, very strangely to say, where has she come from? Okay, so because all the others who were my counterparts and colleagues had come from the corporate world. I was the only one who was
Okay.
an academician. So it was good fun. What also was fun was the pace at which we worked. In college, when we decide on an idea, we would say, hey, well, let's do it. And that meant, 2 months later, 6 months later, maybe next year, next academic year. Here, now meant now. So for me,
Hmm.
that was like a moment of reckoning, to
Okay.
say. So it was fantastic.
So
This was
what
also
can you do you remember some of those things that you implemented where now meant now?
lots of them actually. So learning, I
Okay.
think, keeping your ears and eyes open. I would not open
Okay.
my mouth until I was fairly confident of what I was saying because
Okay.
everything was so new. Everybody
Hmm.
else seemed, in comparison, so much more with it and knowledgeable. So I was
Hmm.
green behind it. So I was like this ustad in college, somebody who taught for
Okay.
many years, subject matter expert, and all of that. And in this new place, you were the newbie. And
Okay.
nobody made me feel that. I think I felt it myself. But the one big thing I learned there, one life lesson that I learned there, I think two actually. If I do, we have time for two? Can I talk about two?
Right? We have all the time. We'll talk
So,
about what interests you the most and what made a difference in your life.
so I complained to the HR person about the kind of people that were coming into training. I
Okay.
think he was a little miffed because I was responsible for training people and making sure they were ready for the job. And I
Right.
complained about that. So I think he meant it sarcastically. And at that point, I was completely oblivious to it. He said, why don't you try hiring them? And
Okay.
me being me, I said, yeah, sure. So the next thing I knew, I was devising newer tests, getting in better quality people. I didn't even realize that. But in hindsight, I realized that he must have meant that as a challenge to say, back off.
Yeah.
And I didn't
Yeah.
pick that up at all. So that was one big thing that I learned to say, hey, if you really want something, go for it and don't let other people decide what you can or cannot do. Maybe you don't have the qualifications for it. But
Right.
if you really know what you want, go after it. I had been doing
Right.
tests and designing tests forever. So for me, it was like a logical progression.
Yeah.
The other big thing was working face to face or very, very close proximity to Americans. I had an
Okay.
American boss, and I would not say no naturally because I came from a large joint family. I was one of the younger ones. Okay, so it was more of a cultural home thing where saying no didn't come naturally. And at the workplace in college, you really didn't get a choice. It was more
Right.
hand me downs. People say, hey, this had to be done, you had to do it. In this place, almost every Friday evening, my boss would come to me and ask me to do something additional. And every time I was just kind of gearing up to go home, there would be additional work. And every Friday, I ended up extending myself and sitting there. One day, I decided I was designing a course on assertion. How do you like that? While I was reading all the course material, I said, it's so easy for me to say all this. How about
Yeah.
practicing it a little bit?
Okay.
And that Friday, I was gearing up. I said, okay, now when she comes and asks me, I am going to say no. So she came, truly enough, Friday 3:30 or so, and said, hey, Aparna, can you do this for me? And I said, sorry, no, I won't be able to do it because I'm doing this, this, this. And I was waiting with bated breath to see what's going to happen. Is something going to explode? Is the ceiling going to
Yeah.
fall on me? She turned on her heel and said, okay, and went away. It was such a letdown for me, to say, oh my God, this is it. This is the consequence. So I learned to say no and not worry about consequences there. And I keep thinking about it now to say, had I done that before, so much would have been different.
Yeah.
But it was
Yeah.
like a eureka moment for me. I was
Okay.
worried and terribly, terribly happy at the same time, to say I've discovered a magic formula and this is right here with me. So those were things that
But
I learned there.
yeah, but again, this assertion is, let's take this between cultures. You did
Sure.
this to the American boss and you said
Yes.
no, and that
Yes.
worked. But if you did that in the Indian context, would it have worked as well?
So in college, we didn't really get a chance to say no. You couldn't say no
Okay.
because all work came from the higher ups and they were
Right.
not up for discussion or negotiation.
Right.
Okay, even if you did discuss, and sometimes we did within our departments, we did discuss. But somebody who was senior most really took a stand and said, this is it. And after that, there was no more revisiting. So I wonder what it would have been like if I had had an Indian boss. But I
Hmm.
thought of it the other way, I actually thought I was doing fantastically well. I didn't even practice on an Indian family member or anything like that and tried it directly at the big boss. I was very happy with that. Huh.
Yeah. But what about the training itself? What is the difference that you found when you said you were unhappy with the training and you came up with a series of tests? What were some of the things that you changed?
So, grammar and all of that. See, most people
Okay.
can speak well. The trouble is when they have to write. And
Right.
because this was a contact center, they all had to speak. And
Okay.
people were being failed on skills that they were not going to be using at all. I don't think people need to know whether it's a past participle or a dangling adverb or anything like that. I think they really need to be able to use it and they need to be able to figure out. So there were some hilarious, stories from the contact center there. So we
Huh.
used to teach people to say things in multiple ways just in case the customer didn't understand. So of
Okay.
course, as Indians, we taught them to slow down. It wasn't necessary to speak in an American accent. It was
Right.
more important to highlight the right words, stress on them, kind of a thing. So we had some hilarious experiences. One of them was this person had to capture. This was for a credit card company. So he had to
Okay.
capture the customer's date of birth.
Okay.
So he asked her, ma'am, when were you born? So this is an elderly person. And she said, what's that? And then he said, ma'am, can you give me your date of birth? She said, sorry, say that again. Now he
Okay.
ran out of ideas. He didn't know what to do. So he actually hummed happy birthday to you. And here you are as a trainer, you're listening to those calls for quality, and you don't know whether to laugh or cry. But he got the job done. She said, "Oh, that it's 5th of May or something like that." So she understood. And then do you
She
take
didn't
that
get the
as
accent the first two times. She didn't
correct?
understand what he was saying.
She didn't,
Okay.
but he hummed it and he held a tune apparently because she understood. So,
No, that's a
so
great
lots of
one. And like you
interesting
said,
stories.
it's literally at the spur of the moment that some of these things have to be invented. And you have to figure out, okay, what is it that the person will respond to? So
So, how
what
do
are
you
some of
train
the others?
people?
These are
How do you train people for this?
how do you train people for something like this?
It's very
Exactly.
difficult. And the
Exactly.
these are people, and we got people who would speak reasonably good English, but if you've
Okay.
not tasted, some of the food that's American, so they
Yeah.
would say, "So are you having pizza for dinner?" What do you do? You've taught them that that's not how you say it, but they've not had it. And then somebody will ask them, "Do you like it?" And the person will say, "No, I don't." What do you like? I like my mother's parathas. So, so it's, this kind of conversation would be, I say, okay, now draw the line, small talk, this is enough. So it's
Okay.
very, very dicey because you have to have that balance. But then, having said that, they started out like that, Venu, but some of them blossomed so beautifully. It really wasn't funny. You just saw them going out of the way and helping. Of course, they got customer service training and everything. And you suddenly saw them weaving it all together to say, okay, I'm actually making a difference to this customer. So I thought they did
Okay.
that very beautifully. So the
Okay.
satisfaction part was great because in college, your students went out and did very, very well. You didn't always get to see that. Here, you train people on
Yeah.
something, half an hour later, they're using it on their job. That was like instant gratification and Maggie noodles, like you saw results right there.
Absolutely, absolutely. No, this is so insightful, Aparna, because in most cases we hear the media stories are all about accent neutralization and people just coming in and sort of trying to adjust to a different lifestyle. Whereas I think, like you said, the job needed to get done, and both cultures, both the American and the Indian, were trying to build those bridges.
Right.
And obviously, the bridges, not in all cases, would meet halfway.
Right.
Sometimes they'd just be
Twisted
suspended somewhere in
somewhere.
the middle.
Yeah. True.
Like,
Very true.
but then you'll have those characters who'll sing happy birthday to you and discover a tenuous link which the person manages to get, which crosses cultures and does all of those
True.
other things.
True.
So you never felt it was important to actually cultivate the accent, or it was not particularly required for what these people were doing?
Look, they all had to annihilate their identities. Every one of them took on an American name.
Okay.
Okay, so Anuradha would become Amy or uh,
Okay.
Annie or something like that, and this is what
Okay.
happened. So it's not like I didn't believe in it. I just believed it was a little bit of a hurdle that their
Okay.
confidence would be up and the job would be done even if they just spoke clearly.
Okay.
So I think that itself was a huge climb for them coming from where they were. They were thinking in their languages and translating. So
Right.
translations caused a lot of, for every day I would
Problem.
come home and share some joke or the other like that, which was real. And my daughter would keep saying, please write about it, please write about it.
Yes, you should.
So
You should. No, that's a phase, Aparna, which is kind of past now because today the accents
yeah,
and I think some of the youngsters today will probably tell you which is the latest. Whether it's Breaking Bad or whether it's something else which is currently in vogue. They are absolutely up to date. The
correct,
net has equalized the entire thing. What people are watching, and the fact that Netflix is now across 170 countries. Culture has now got flattened, at least of a
absolutely.
watching kind.
So vice
So,
versa also, where they
hmm,
also know that they're talking to someone in India and it's completely
right.
above board now. Those days it was very surreptitious.
Okay. Okay. Okay.
And we actually had to tell them what is the weather like outside. And you're supposed to say, hey, I'm sitting in New York and it's snowing, which is a blatant lie, but that was part of the job. The guy hadn't seen, I mean, he was from Salem. He'd never seen snow in his life and telling him. So we've had very smart customers say, okay, so tell me what the weather's like outside? And they will tell you, ours is an AC officer, I can't look out, or something like that. These people would be equally smart in their responses. So I think on both
Okay.
sides there's greater awareness, and
Right.
yeah,
Right. So then this phase lasted how long? What was it like? What
two
did
and a
you?
half years. And
Okay.
the reason
Okay.
for moving on was so strange. It had nothing to do with the job or anything. I used to drive 26 kilometers each way.
Okay.
And,
Wow. That
that
was
became a
in
little
India. That's
tedious.
quite a bit. Yeah.
In those days, yes. Not anymore, I think.
Not
But,
anymore. Yeah, that's
and
true.
I had a
That's true.
non-AC little car, and
Okay.
I would drive happily and go. Uh, the thing was that working hours would keep extending because this was also working to the US times. So I wouldn't really get up at 6 and come back the way I'm supposed to. And lots of little challenges. I had a growing daughter, and then she would say, when you come back, bring back blue chart paper. All shops would be closed by the time I got here. So there were all those kind of difficulties. I had a fantastic learning there, and I got certified on a few things. It was very good learning. So I then took up a job very close to home, the distance criteria being a big one on my mind at that time. And true to my kismat, that office shifted to a larger campus 5 months from that time. So for
Oh,
5 months, I enjoyed myself by, reaching office before I could hit top gear. That this was a place called Phoenix Global Solutions,
okay.
which got taken over by TCS afterwards. So this is where I
Okay.
really learned the business side of things. I learned the word ROI literally from there. Otherwise, it was still the first job was more of an extension of college. So in terms of learning, it was mostly training oriented learning. I didn't look at it from the business side at all. So I worked with a bunch of people from GE in Phoenix Global Solutions. And suddenly I was sitting at a meeting and wondering whether they were speaking in English, because they talked about FTE, they talked about ROI, they talked about this. And I said, sorry, gentlemen, but can you just say that in layman's terms? Because I don't understand a word of what you're saying. And then I actually got trained, on became a green belt and all that. So I suddenly became much better at process improvement. So this was an organization that was offering only technical training, and I brought in this whole soft skills piece. And as people got promoted, they all went in. So it was like this whole um, continuum that we put in and said, if you need to reach here, you need to do this. And they had a very beautiful campus, which is built like the Epcot Center. It's like a glass ball.
Okay.
And it cost them the earth to maintain. And my task was to make the money to keep it going. So I had to get into the business side of things, even though that was not by design. That's why I said not by design at all. So there again,
Right.
I went in as a training manager and grew, started involved in everything from the time people came in until they got promoted, did night shifts in the previous one too, and this one, just for a lark. And actually had so much fun and, learning so much from watching people in action and all that. So this was not just contact center. There was a contact center as well, but also managerial leadership training that was coming in. So I progressed in terms of what I was doing. Got certified on, a couple of psychometric tools because they were needed. So learned a lot there. But the biggest learning from there was this whole business aspect of looking at it from the money lens, not just making a difference. This was also,
Okay.
sorry, you were going to ask me a
Two, no,
question.
two questions, Aparna. One is that I think that called for a lot of confidence to be able to sit in a room where you didn't understand what is going and then say, hey, I don't understand. Tell me. You didn't worry about what people would think. Whereas I think there is a lot of, around this whole thing of trying to get away, that fake it till you make it. There's this whole thing now which says that
Yes.
just coast, even if you don't understand. Whereas you decided that I will level with people, I will tell them I don't care what they think, but they're going to tell me, okay, what it means. I'll understand what it means and then figure out. And then the shift, how did you change? What changed in your mind when you went from training people to being responsible for business?
I think that was a dicey moment, but just that I didn't give it so much thought. I think today what I'd had quietly done is Googled FTE under the table, or on my phone. Those days we had phones, except that they were largish. So you couldn't
Yeah.
surreptitiously do that. No, I was going to work very closely with these folks. These were operations folks, and I was going to work very closely with them. So it wasn't just finding out what all those terminologies meant that day. It was more about telling them, you three are from GE, I'm not. So if you're talking when I'm around, please be aware that you need to speak in English and not just, a strange language. Yeah. Believe it or not, I became actually quite proficient because I'm a good learner and I don't mind asking. So I had no baggage, right? If I had had an MBA HR or an MBA with a specialization in training, I may have thought twice, thrice, four times before saying, hey, I don't know. I had no such pretensions. And the biggest confidence for me was my sister principal in college saying, if ever you decide to come back, there's always place. So I felt like that was like the net below a trapeze artist, right? It's always there. So it's there and you may not need it. You hope you don't use it. It's like medical insurance or all of those
Yeah.
things.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
but it's there. So I didn't really worry about image, But now that you say it, it seems like a big thing. But at that time, it wasn't. It was a question of survival. I need to do something the
Right.
next day. I also learned phenomenal detail orientation from the boss there. I had a very supportive boss called Vasanta, but the big boss was a gentleman by the name of Satish Bangalore. The kind of detailing that he did. So I've heard of bespoke, I've heard of customization. Those days, the big question was, does India really have the capability to do the work that we are giving them, right? And he would receive people at the old airport in Bangalore, put them in the Leela, come into the office and tell us, Janice is going to be sitting here in the boardroom and she's looking for this, this, this. Peter will be sitting here and he's keen on this. We were prepped completely. And then in the evening, we got together. So there was this whole thing of proving our mettle and then mingling and becoming these social people. I think his way of anticipating all this really helped the business. For me, this is a completely new ball game. I mean, I would have gladly gone home instead of going to the Leela in the evening. But I realized what an important part it was if they were to see you. So he called me aside and said, look, you seem to know about American culture and all of that. I said, yes, I've taught it, but I've never visited the country or anything like that. So he says, no, just have a regular conversation with them because I want them to see what you can do. And I think it'll do wonders. So, seeing them as social equals in the evening, I think made a huge difference. And for me, that was an eye opener to say, just hard work and capability is not going to take you home. And this whole prep of how he would say who's looking for what, it was almost like anticipating the customer's needs. And this is something that I use in training today when I'm making a pitch to a client today. I'd say you probably may be looking at this. Is this something you're looking at? Now that your people are here for so many years, probably you have a need for this. And they always say, yes, yes, how did you get that? And I know where I learned this.
No, and this is fascinating because the IT part of it and India's credentials in IT today, I think the world over they're established, they're very well known. But marshaling all these forces and getting people to believe that we can deliver is another set of skill sets which I think we invented on the fly with people like you. Because you had to figure out, like you said, in a meeting from a culture that is not familiar, in a country you haven't visited, and you still had to make out that this is what that customer is wrestling with. A sales guy in the US meeting them would know the context perfectly,
Absolutely, yeah.
but you had to figure out the context and then say, okay, this is what you're looking at, and then imagine that, okay, this is the problem that I'm going to solve, and then move it. So I think it calls for two steps ahead, thinking two steps ahead, which I don't think ever get got talked about in media, or the kind of people that you had. I remember my brother-in-law telling me that the people who were interacting with the client, they were so valuable because the business came because of that interaction and the trust that was built. And if that person left, then the next person would not be the next in line. It would be somebody who would be able to build that whole. And like you pointed out right now, your boss was looking, Sanjay Bangalore was looking, and he figured out that you were the person who would be able to make those connections, which is very perceptive. And I think this doesn't get talked about. Like you said, you've made it a part of your training program. What are some of the other things that you picked up? I just wanted to focus on that because I thought that you were making a very relevant and an important point.
I think also wearing what you can and cannot do proudly. You know, I had
Okay.
learned to say no before, but also to say, no, this is how far we'll go. Sorry, client. So while you're
Okay.
bespoke, you're willing to accommodate. And it's usually the client really checking, and they're hard drivers, right? Some of them. So they
Right.
push you to see how far you'll go. So will your people do
Yes.
this in the middle of the night? Will they do this on Sundays? Will they do this? So why do you have so many holidays? I said, I didn't make them. They're there. Now you have to work around it. You tell me what needs to be done. So I got more confident and comfortable speaking like that, to say, okay, so this we have this. So why can't your folks come in on a Sunday? Why can't they come in on Diwali? Okay, so we were in
Okay.
essential services. You did have a skeletal
Right.
staff running things, but everybody did not need to come. And a lot of
Right.
people came from the north, northeast. They would take 3 days to just get home, which is very hard for an American to imagine.
Yeah.
I say, look,
Exactly.
but why can't they fly? They said. I'm saying there are no planes to Uttarakhand. They will go somewhere and then take a bus and then, probably walk the last, mile. Who knows? So I'm saying you have to do that. So I got a little more comfortable with that kind of a conversation because probably of that social thing where we were equal footing. The next day when you met them, there was no hierarchy, right? The first day when
Yeah.
starting out, it must have been, hey, here's somebody to come to give you business, and you have to earn it and woo them.
Right.
You didn't have that pressure anymore. So I
Okay.
definitely learned that. The other thing
Okay.
I learned was this was the first time I had to let go of people. And Venu, that gave me sleepless nights. There were people whose performances didn't match. Expectations were set up front, to say, if you don't shape up, you have to, sail out and
Right.
all of that. And yet, when it happened, I knew the guy had EMIs. I knew he had two small kids. Okay, and I couldn't sleep that night. And this was a hard, transition for me. I was responsible as an HR person for that. So, and the first time I did it, I was in bad shape. I My face would not have shown anything in front of that person, but when I came back, anybody who knew me well would have known I was shattered. And I felt like I was messing with somebody's career and all of that. I became hard headed afterwards. I mean, this happened once, twice, 13 times, 15 times. There was this sensitivity which never left. So that's what people would say. Even when I asked them to leave, they would say, I know, you've given me a fair chance, kind of a thing. So it was to come very gently. But the message was non negotiable to say, you can leave now, you can leave in a month. So I think that's a huge skill for me from my boss, that I learned. And she knew I was uncomfortable. So she'll say, I want you to fire him. And I keep thinking, why is she pushing me to the deep end? She seems to like me. But this was huge growth for me. So by the time I went into my last corporate job, I was quite seasoned at many aspects. And there it was just a question of scale. So again, I left Phoenix because of distances. So again, I was driving long distances. I had elderly in-laws at home, little child growing up, husband posted outside. So it was like a huge responsibility, and I was straddling all those. AXA was just sheer scale. Had to negotiate with the French, had to bring in. So AXA was a company that grew inorganically. They grew by acquiring other companies. So you were not
Okay.
assuming one culture. It was so many different little cultures. So here it was not as easy to read what the need was. And for a lot of them, we were bringing their jobs to India, literally learning from them and saying, okay, now
Yeah.
once this is done, you don't have a job. So that was not the easiest of things. People were not the most cooperative when those kind of things happened. Again, I had two very, very supportive bosses. And this was fantastic. So all my worries about not traveling overseas, I had traveled on holiday, but I had never traveled on work. All that had changed. And I think it made a huge difference when you met them face to face. So, they had heard my name, we had had audio calls. This was still slightly before video calls. And when you actually met in person and said, this is our capability, we can do this, I'm confident we can do it. I think the receiving of it, the buy-in was very, very different. So that was like a whole big skill. And then suddenly I got so drawn into the admin part of it. I was signing more checks than doing my real job. And that's when I said, okay, enough is enough. I need to move out. I moved out and I became certified as a coach.
Okay.
And that's where the journey, took a little turn. And I wanted to travel the world.
Okay.
So I've been doing that in bits and pieces, but I imagined that I would backpack and go at one shot. That didn't happen. So
Okay.
it's happened in bits and pieces.
No, it's amazing how you moved from accent training to or training people to business development to negotiating contracts to actually managing cultures and not just people.
True.
And then saying that you had got so good at this that they decided that you needed to get into the admin side of things. And like you said, it was not, which is, so some people make the transition, Aparna, but some don't. What do you think is the differentiation? Is it willing to change? Is it a willingness to change? Is it capability?
I think it's a mindset, right? It's more about
Okay.
wanting to learn. The day you say, look, I know everything, I
Yeah.
think that day you're a dead duck, right? Because here I had no such problem. I didn't know anything. And I had no qualms in saying that 20 times. So it was easy for me because I would ask the dumbest of questions. I would go to someone whose job was at stake and say, hey, tell me more about what you're doing. How do you do this? What are your challenges? So I realized that my one on one connect was better. And they actually opened up, knowing fully well that this could result in a hastened exit for them. Yeah, on my part it was clearly just curiosity, just wanting to learn. So I think now when I look at it as a coach and I see a pattern, this wanting to learn thing is very, very strong. I wanted to learn new things, new things, new things. So I think that's
That
helped.
I think, yeah, you've I think you've hit the nail on the head there, because for a lot of people, this want to learn something new is a milestone that they passed about 20 years ago. They're sort of coasting on something that they've learned, and then they want to guard it. As if, if I know this, if the skill is taken away from me, I don't know what to do. Whereas,
True.
like you said, it if as the skill evolves, unless you're trying new things out, where is the learning?
And you don't always choose what you get to learn. You may
Exactly.
need to learn something that may not be appealing to you, and that's okay. You still give it a shot, and if you fail, there are other avenues. That's all. So,
That's fantastic, Aparna. That's
and
really the nub of what a whole lot of careers are about. That what you're learning may not be something that you really want to
you
learn or
choose,
want
yeah.
to do,
And you'd have
but
never opted for it yourself. I know I
exactly.
wouldn't have. I wouldn't have. So, as a coach, Venu, the
Yeah,
biggest thing for me was not to answer when you knew the answer. I've always been a reasonably good listener. You're dying to say it. You say, can't you see it? But as a coach, you hold back, and then you learn to convert that into questions that nudge people. So I think I've evolved as a person. I've definitely become calmer. You were very kind in saying that I was calm when we had technical difficulties. It's all come with, I think, a lot of working on
yeah,
people, working on things, and say, look, this happens. So I think
yeah.
that's so you can't become a coach without changing yourself, and that
Right.
has been extremely beneficial for me. Holding back, not talking about, hey, I know this, I know it all. You don't ever say that, right? Because you don't know it all, and you never will. One lifetime is barely enough, right? So I think that was one.
So, what are
So
the
the
kind
other
of
thing,
things you do now as a coach? So, I mean,
oh,
I'm
I do
just
some. I'm actually like a little bit of a free bird. So what I do is I only take up about 10 or 12 days of work. And I
okay.
give my heart and soul for that, whether it's facilitation or coaching. So I have regular coaching that goes on right through the year, 6 months assignments, things like that. But facilitation, I only take up 10 or 12 days. That's because I'm a movie buff. So I have to sit quietly and my way of de-stressing after a hard day of talking and facilitating is sit quietly and not just watch. Quite often it's rewatch something old and familiar. And my mother keeps telling me I watch it like I have an exam the next day. I think that's the intensity with which I watch it. That is true. So that's de-stressing for me. I also love traveling. So I do travel, every year, definitely travel. It just took us forever to finish India. There's so much to see here. And so many different things to learn. So that's been a fantastic thing. And during the COVID times, five friends and I got together. We wrote a book. This is something that we had been
No, that
intending
was,
to
yeah,
do, and it
amazing.
just came. It just shaped up beautifully. You asked
Right.
me to tell you some amusing stories from training. May I just add one? It just suddenly occurred to me.
Yeah.
Do we have the time? Do we have to close now?
Of
Or
course we do. Of course we do.
okay. So there was this person that I was training, and those days, I had to test what I had designed, so I would train myself. I had a team. First, I would always train to see timing okay, instruction okay, is it falling well, is it being received, is it getting the desired results, and I enjoyed every part of it because I would go back, revise, change it, because it's not falling well, change the instruction. So there was this concept that I was explaining to somebody. I explained once, and I explained twice, and I explained thrice, and he hadn't caught on. It was a very important piece. Now, what I saw was the other people getting restless because everybody else was getting bored. While I wanted to give
Right.
this person all the additional um, support, the other
Yeah.
people were also my audience, and I had to keep that in mind. I had to be cognizant. I said, why don't you and I catch up at lunch? And we can sit and do it. He was so apologetic, and this is where English, I think, plays a big part. He was so apologetic. He said, I know you've been very, very patient and kind. You explained it once, twice, thrice, four times, and I haven't picked you up yet. So I was doubled up in laughter. He had no clue what was happening. Nobody in the class had any clue what was happening. So I couldn't resist it. So I told him,
That's a line.
I doubt if that was the intention, but it's still, thank you for
Yeah.
so people
And
unwittingly
it's,
say the most hilarious things. And
yeah.
that's, I think, what lightens the atmosphere and makes you want to go for more.
Yeah. Yeah. No, and the fact is that all that happened in that one sentence is for that word to be wrongly placed.
Yeah.
And it completely
I've had
transforms.
CEOs introduce me. There was a company in which I went in as a coach, and I used to be present there all week. And then he said, okay, she has so much experience, and she comes with X amount of experience and all that. Please take advantage of her. So this is what makes life easy. You're looking for all the funny things in different moments. And intentionally, unintentionally, it's just there. And then that makes your day. For the rest of the day, you can't stop smiling.
Yeah. No, and yeah, so we started with the language. We started with linguistics, and right from the beginning, you're trying to teach people grammar, and telling them that, oh, wait, past participle, hanging, whatever it is. But this was even after you know the language. These are the things that kind of, the nuances which people don't pick up unless you're so steeped in it that you see the humor, but as far as they're concerned, like you said, they haven't even figured out what exactly they were saying wrong.
True.
But okay, so let me just come to something, which is, would you do a periodic assessment at any time as to, am I doing enough? Is life okay? Or would you then say that, fine, I know that this particular thing of moving from admin to the thing was a milestone. It was one of those places. But before that, are you a person who coasted or who tried to set targets?
Coast it, definitely. But at the same
Okay.
time, I have this discipline of updating my
Okay.
CV every 6 months. I'm not even applying for a job. In the past 10
Okay.
years, I've been on my own. But I update my CV every 6 months. This I learned from a friend. And look at it because you tend to forget certain things. I mean, you'd have done the
Okay.
certification. And off late, in the early days, I never did. But off late, I'm trying to keep track of how many hours of what you're doing. Is that good
Okay.
for you? Because clients suddenly ask you, you say you've trained people, you say, how many hours have you done? And you have no clue. You say, I've been using it for the past 20 years. Okay, so convert that into hours and you will have no clue. So I'm now actually looking at it. But for myself, every January and June, I update my CV and I look at it to say, where am I going? What would I like to add? This is what helps me in adding newer certifications. So I'm just adding one. I'm taking an exam next weekend. And this is something that's not for anybody else. It just makes me happy that, I'm learning something. Through COVID, I've been doing online certificates. I think it's a question of this quest, right? To say, hey, what more can you bring in? So I don't mind learning anything from anybody. I learned how to open the quarter window of a Maruti from a 5-year-old boy. He just used a ruler and slipped it. He said, can you teach me? And he taught me. So I'm saying I'm happy to learn from any quarters. So I do audit. At the same time, I don't obsess to say, here's where I want to go. I think that's probably because maybe I achieved more than I actually planned to. So I'm quite
Okay.
content. I'm doing what I really want to do, which is read, write, generally be useful. But if you look at all this, while it looks like a very checkered career, the underlying string, if you were to look at it like a string of pearls, is the fact that you help people to identify their potential and realize it. Whether you take teaching, whether you take, being a training manager, whether you take being a general manager or a vice president of HR, you really helping people, and a coach, of course, you're helping people identify their potential and realize that. I think that's the underlying part that keeps me going, and this is something I want to do.
And I think the unsaid part in that is all the while it's something that you're doing with yourself as well,
Absolutely.
realizing your
So
potential, because you're trying to figure out, okay, how deep do I go? How deep can
absolutely.
I go? It's like,
Yeah.
and that's the point at which you want to push yourself and then say, okay, can I do this? And even if you fail, like how we started out today, I was wondering 10 minutes into the show, am I going to call this off?
What is happening? I was
Or
wondering, I
we just,
wonder what the policy was.
yeah, we don't have a policy on this particular thing. In fact,
You've
this is
never
one of the
had
things that
difficulties,
kills
I
it
believe.
until now. Okay, but we had a previous thing where the current went off. So, but I think the point is that a live show makes you feel that you're in the moment. If I was recording, then I would gloss over something. And the other part which you said, I'm willing to make those uh, those mistakes that happen, because unless you do that, then what you edit from this, and I've always felt that the stream of consciousness conversation, that is
James Joyce.
I'm not rehearsing it, I'm not trying to package it, I'm not coming back to it in a different edit, I'm trying to understand in the moment. Maybe there are times we'll go completely off and the conversation may not be interesting, but that's not the point. The point is whether are you pushing? And that, I think, it's a wonderful thing. Like you said, it's a string of pearls that you sort of assemble. And uh, when the next pearl gets added, how long does it grow? All of those things are part of whatever you
Then
do.
also kicking yourself to say, hey, I should have said that. My thought is slightly different and say, okay, the next time I know I should say that. Not even
Yeah.
bothered about the
Okay.
fact that I didn't say it. So,
I'll just put up a couple of reactions. Aparna, this came
sure.
up. I'm not sure exactly in which context, but here's Monish Jadoo, who said that's an invaluable point, ma'am. You aimed at survival. Wow. Okay. And
Thank
this
you. Thank
is
you, Monish.
Karthik, who came on a previous show, which he yoga. He teaches yoga and
I
this thing.
saw
And
the recording
okay,
of his program.
yeah. So and that is the fascinating part. So you work with a fair number of young people as well, or do you work with
Oh, plenty.
largely? Okay, okay.
Plenty of
So
them. Plenty young
what
and
are the
old.
things you're seeing now
So
when
people come
talking
and
to
ask
young?
you Gen Z and all of that. But scratch
Yeah,
the surface, Venu, the worries are the same, the pressures are the same. We box
yeah,
them. And this
yeah,
is where, you started the program by how do you interact with people? And I said one on one.
yeah.
So I'm not even seeing them in that box. I'm not even trying to fix them into any particular category. To me, that person is Prashant or, Rekha or whoever.
Right.
So, and they come with their own pressure. So often and this is the other thing that I've learned, I think, as a coach. You apply your own standards to other people, right? And
Right.
whether it's empathy or whatever, you like to view it from your lens. And I learned all of this the hard way, to say that's not true at all. We're talking about this. Just last week, a friend of mine was saying, for one of her virtual programs, there was this person who was logging in what looked like a little better than a hut. Okay, and we
Okay.
take so much for granted. And then we say, please turn on your cameras. So I think empathy is a very big part of what I do, because you don't know what the other person's pressures are. And you teach that cerebrally, you know it, but it just comes out very easily. Now I become very cognizant of it, to say your standards are not everybody else's standards. So we need to be very, very aware. So a lot of young people, they may look flippant, they may dress differently from the way you would like them to, but they're very keen to learn, most of them. A lot of them are also a little mixed up, to say, what am I doing? Where am I? Because let's take data sciences, for example. Not everybody studied that, but they're working in that field. It's only now there are even courses, right? 5 years ago, they weren't even courses. So I think a lot of them are still figuring out a lot of things, and there is a lot of pressure on them from maybe their homes, nobody to guide them. So you said teachers played a very important role. For some of them, they've had the advantage. A lot of them haven't. So I think that makes a big difference. One little nudge in the right direction, to say, hey, I see you showing potential in this direction.
And that's so important.
Yes.
The that little, it's not one big victory, but a series of little ones, which you require from time to time validation. You require time to time, from time to time, people telling you that, yeah, it's okay, you made a mistake, that doesn't matter. And sometimes I've been in a profession where it was very easy to run someone down, because creative is very, very subjective. So when
Yeah.
you take an idea across in your early stages, you can have bosses who can trample
Just
on it, twist it, break it into a million pieces. But I had people who helped me up, and I think that is a lesson for life, because it never stops. You treat a whole lot of people the same way that you have been taught and the way you learn. And like you said, sometimes it's purely luck that you happen to come
true.
across people who, the people that you mentioned, who said, you were perceptive enough to say, this is important, I need to learn it. Sometimes you're put into the same room as people who have a whole lot of stuff, but that unwillingness to learn can prevent you from getting there, which
That, and the other
unfortunately.
part, which is where the quieter ones, you make
Yeah.
it a point to include them, right? It, by extension.
Right.
They may
Right.
not of their own open their mouths, and you say, but I'd love to hear from you, Ashok. What do you have to say? Kind of a thing. I think
Right.
that's a consistent thing. You're so right there. Yeah.
Yeah. So, just to come back to, how many people have you trained? You've had a career in which you've 20, 30 years, and you've trained so many people, so many lives
True.
you've impacted.
For a
So,
client yesterday, I was actually trying to count. It would
huh,
be something between 18 and 20,000.
wow.
Yeah, easily. I mean, and that's a conservative figure. No, so that's
Yeah.
because I was training long before this was really my profession. In the sense,
Okay.
teaching also is in a lot of way giving people not just what's in the textbook, right? So
You're right.
it was teaching life skills. It was saying step out of your shadow, some move, go out of your comfort zone. So all of those. Yeah, it's only now
Yeah.
that I've even started counting and things like that. I never did before.
Yeah. And you're so right that a whole lot of these things you never sort of keep track of, because you don't put a figure to that. You don't try and say, what is it that, which is why I think it's very difficult to measure learning. What have you learned in,
It is.
10 years of, or if someone asks me, what have you learned in being so many years of being in the profession? What is it that there are three or four points that you can probably rattle off. But if you are asked and pushed, so I don't know if that's the right thing or the wrong thing, but maybe it's the way the world is going. Because
Number of
if you
hours.
get, yeah.
Data is needed for everything. Huh?
Yeah, but I have the slightly different this thing, because data is in so many forms and has to be applied in so many places and not necessarily in the same context. So my take, at least something that I've been thinking about, is data is ore, it's not oil as yet.
It is.
It's not reached a
Absolutely.
point where the channels have been constructed and it flows. The petrol vehicles or diesel vehicles, it's easy. So I only have to make vehicles that take one of these two things. But if it's oil, it's got to fit in everywhere. It doesn't.
True.
So, so, so
No,
I
so
don't
I
even
would
think.
measure that. Sorry, I would measure that when people come back and say, "Look, you made a difference," and this may be 15 years after you've,
Yes,
done
yes,
something for them. They stay in
yes.
touch. So the day you run a good program, because you'll get LinkedIn requests. You say,
Okay,
"Ma'am, can I call you?" And I also
right,
make it a point to say, "Look, this is not a fly-by-night operation. It's not a wham bam, thank you, ma'am. It's not a course we're running.
right.
So here I am. You can always reach out," and I do, and people do reach out. So that's the beauty of it,
Okay,
I guess. So.
okay. Wonderful. So there's one thing which, how did you develop an interest in making pickles?
Now this is maybe adding a spice to people's lives. No, actually, having grown up in Gujarat, what you see is jars and jars of pickles in most homes. You'll see it's prominently displayed with pride, and this is done for the year. So in the summer, they will have 15 different kinds of mango pickles that are made, and this lasts a whole year. So this whole going back to our roots interests me. So I like cooking, and I like making pickles because I think we have so much that's kind of lost today. And
Yeah,
I find that friends love it when you present them things that are homemade, handmade. They
right,
probably value it more than anything that's store bought. Why store bought? I mean, you can sit here and order, and it's going to reach you in half
right,
an hour. So
right.
that's why I like it. It just makes me very happy and I feel like there's a lot of sun going waste and lovely mangoes going waste and things like that. So I don't know where
No,
I got
it's
it, but this is only about 10 years old. I never made pickles
okay.
before that, but
So
I
you
love
just
that.
started off in a this thing, and you decided to make some pickle, and then got more and more interested in it.
And
And
then expanded the what was being made into pickle. So that
okay,
kept
okay.
expanding. Yeah. So
So what is the range like? What are the kind of pickles you make?
from orange peel to mango to lemon and red chilies, green chilies, the works, garlic. So my windowsill is full of beautiful bottles. In fact, somebody
Wow.
told me you should put that as your display picture because that would be unusual. I said, okay, thank you so much.
No, it's fascinating, and somewhere I believe, Aparna, that your boundless curiosity and your willing to experiment is really part of what makes you the person you are. Because at the end of the day, if you're curious, you're interested. If you're interested, you put in the effort. And if you put in the effort, the results come. Not the way you expect,
Yeah.
but something
If
moves
the
somewhere.
effort, if the effort and the journey itself is your pleasure, then the rest of it
Yes,
is all bonus, I think, that happens. That's what has happened to me.
absolutely. So, though we started late, I think it's been a wonderful hour. Thank you for taking the time.
Thank you.
And
Thank you for the
I think
opportunity. And you're so easy to talk to, Venu. Thank you so much.
no, that's because I think the people I talk to themselves are have so much to say that it takes me very little to get them to open up. Because I think it's wonderful when I get to know about, and it's already yours is the 16 stories of careers, and I'm looking forward to meeting more and more people from completely different professions. And the lovely part of it is how it starts from exactly where you said I had no clue, and then there is an awareness, there is a set of learning. So if it was teaching a classroom and then teaching a whole group of students to at work, and that was a particularly difficult phase in Indian IT, where you suddenly had to scale companies. I don't think anywhere in the world companies had to grow overnight to 60 and 70,000 people, and we
Mhm.
managed it. And you played a role in it. You were responsible for shaping some of the careers that happened, and then stepping back to say, no, personally I need to do this. That is wonderful. So
Thank you so much. Thank you
thank you,
so much.
Aparna.
So
It's been a
people say, would you
pleasure.
exchange it for anything? Not really. Not at all. This has been good. Mm.
Thank you.
Thank you so
I'll
much.
thank you very much. That brings us to the end of another session. And thank you, Karthik. And it's like I said, maybe it's just one of those things where you're happy to talk to people who have a lot to say, who've had a wonderful life. And thank you again for listening. And we'll see you the next time. And hopefully, we would have managed the issue by then. Thank you.